are times where a chemical restraint is appropriate. That should be extremely narrow and only through the use of the state, authorized by the state and with medical professionals. The third item that we address in this bill are on-site visits, some announced and some unannounced. I think having unannounced visits is entirely appropriate. The fourth thing this legislation does is brings us in conformity with national standards. It provides for suicide prevention programs. Every facility in this state, every licensee of the 248, all of them should have a suicide prevention program. That's important. The fifth item is a non-discrimination policy. This legislation calls out the need for a non-discrimination policy. Again, 248 facilities, all 248 licenses should, and when I say facilities, licenses, all those licensees should have that in place. The last item on my list of 6 is publicly posting a complaint process in the residences. We need to make sure that if there is a problem, the process to resolve that is clear to the public, it's clear to the kids that are there. So let me give you some recent examples in lines of the bill that have been problematic. Line 892 deals with restricting peer restraint. Some of the investigations that, as I've met with the state of Utah, we've had problems where the system has allowed kids to restrain each other while the facilities look past that, and that's been allowed. That's not going to be allowed. We need to be very, very careful there. Line 881, cruel and unusual punishment, treatment, or practices. We cannot use treatment as a way to humiliate children in these programs. We make that very clear in the legislation. Lines 412 through 414 requires reporting of all physical intervention. We in the amendment, we do require if restraints are used, that's got to be reported within 24 hours. And I think that's important. In the end, what I hope is those restraints aren't used, but if they are used, that needs to be reported immediately. Lines 971 through 977 requires some weekly communication with parents, and that is an important issue to me. I know through the state, our investigators have found that there are children who've been deprived phone calls with their parents for months, and that's just not appropriate, and we're better than that. Line 912 through 925 requires documentation debriefing if there is a problem, and I list a specific part to make sure that happens. With that, again, as I welcome Ms. Hilton up here, I just remind the committee that we're here with legislation to help an industry that deals with children. I appreciate her being here today. I think this is deeply personal. With that, I would welcome up our first witness.
And just to be clear, this is part of your presentation?
Yes, thank you. And it looks like the chair was really gracious. Thank you, Senator Weiler, for bringing...
Those drinks are for you, but if Ms. Hilton wants one, she can have one.
It's got you covered.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman Weiler, and members of the Judiciary, Law Enforcement, and Criminal Justice Committee for allowing me to address you. My name is Paris Hilton. I'm an institutional abuse survivor, and I speak today on behalf of the hundreds of thousands of children currently in residential care facilities across the United States. For the past 20 years, I've had a recurring nightmare where I'm kidnapped in the middle of the night by 2 strangers, strip searched, and locked in a facility. I wish I could tell you that this haunting nightmare was just a dream, but it is not. When I was 16, 2 transporters woke me up in the middle of the night with handcuffs. They asked me if I wanted to go the easy way or the hard way. They carried me out of my home as I screamed at the top of my lungs for my parents' help. I was taken to the airport and separated from everything and everyone I knew and loved. I had no idea what was happening or where I was going until we landed. This was my introduction to the state of Utah, but not the troubled teen industry. I had attended 3 other facilities, Sea-Doo and Cascade in California, and Ascent Wilderness Program in Idaho. At Sea-Doo, I was not allowed to speak to or look at my peers. The staff verbally abused me, calling me vulgar names that should never be said to a child. Sea-Doo forced us to participate in attack therapy designed to humiliate and degrade you. I did not comply with the program, so I was brought to Ascent in Idaho. At Ascent, I was forced to do physical labor while malnourished and sleep deprived. I couldn't speak to my parents because the staff said I didn't deserve to. One day, a staff member strangled me and slapped me across the face in front of the other kids. She did this to instill fear in everyone. Despite hypothermia and physical beatings from staff, there was no medical care. Next, I was sent to Cascade. I received no education or therapy there. I feared daily for my well-being, but I would not let them break my spirit. Provo Canyon School was my final stop. I was given clothes with a number on the tag. I was no longer Paris. I was only number 127. I was verbally, mentally, and physically abused on a daily basis. I was cut off from the outside world and stripped of all of my human rights. I was not allowed to be myself, hold my own opinions, or even speak. Without a diagnosis, I was forced to consume medication that made me feel numb and exhausted. I didn't breathe fresh air or see the sunlight for 11 months. There was zero privacy. Every time I would use the bathroom or take a shower, it was monitored. At 16 years old, as a child, I felt their piercing eyes staring at my naked body. I was just a kid and felt violated every single day. The Fourth Amendment in our Constitution gives us the right to privacy, yet while using the bathroom and while showering, staff would violate my rights. This is unconstitutional, degrading, and terrifying. Although Provo Canyon School marketed itself as a premier treatment center, as it was if it was hell itself was on earth. I cried myself to sleep every single night, praying I would wake up from this nightmare. The staff there were evil and sadistic and seemed to enjoy their power in being able to abuse children. For no reason, they threw me into the isolation room called solitary confinement. One day in isolation felt like a week. That small room covered in scratch marks and smeared blood with no bathroom is one of the most vivid and traumatizing memories I've ever experienced in my entire life. Children were restrained, hit, thrown into walls, strangled, and sexually abused regularly in Provo. I could not report this because all communication with my family was monitored and censored. And what is disgusting is the program doesn't just censor communication with family, but also with the entire outside world, so there was no way we could call for help. Recently, a staff member told me how these programs would hide abuse from the Office of Licensing. Before an on-site inspection, a text chat would alert the staff. They were expected to clean up swiftly, hide the problem kids, and force the children to appear to be happy. And if they didn't, they would be punished. They would have staff who were off the clock come in so their staffing ratio would comply with requirements. They knew what they were doing was wrong. Provo Canyon School excuses their abusive behavior by saying they are now owned by a new company, Universal Health Services. UHS, you can't silence me. After conducting extensive research, we found out that while this facility was indeed sold after my time, the practices used and the staff employed remain today the same. One staff member would brag to other students that she was the one who broke Paris Hilton. Violating confidentiality is not only unethical, but also a violation of HIPAA. This woman was employed by Universal Health Services for 20 years. She was let go this October, only after my documentary premiered. I tell my story not so that anyone feels bad for me, but to shine a light on the reality of what happened then and is still happening now. The people who work at, run, and fund these programs should be ashamed of themselves. How can people live with themselves knowing this abuse is happening? Right now in Utah, there are thousands of children experiencing abuse that do not have access to legal counsel, advocacy, or their family and friends, and who are counting on us to do the right thing. We, all of us, have the opportunity to Vice President Harris, and President Biden, and everyone listening to my voice today to denounce child abuse. Utah has the highest percentage in the nation of children sent here from foster care. The juvenile justice system and Department of Special Education, they deserve to have proper treatment that is evidence-based and administered by trained staff and not leave with more issues than they came in with. Children are our future. No child deserves to be tortured and traumatized. Last April, a child in Michigan, Cornelius Fredericks, threw a piece of bread and as a result was violently restrained by numerous staff and died. How many more kids need to die for progress to be made? One thing is clear: youth in residential care are not protected by Utah's current laws. Imagine it being your child who's being subjected to physical, mental, psychological, and emotional abuse on a daily basis, or your child was left in a facility 67 days longer than medically necessary, even after a judge ordered his release. Or your child with intellectual disabilities who was forcibly injected with Haldol 17 times and restrained nearly 30 times in a 3-month period last year. This is a true story. It breaks my heart that this child told her case manager that she thought she would die in the facility after suffering such a severe beating in her sleep that she required facial x-rays and couldn't eat. These are just 2 out of millions of stories. These institutions have been preying on vulnerable children and parents for the past 70 years. That is generations of survivors who have had no recourse and no advocacy and have to live with that pain for their entire lives. Since my documentary premiered in September, survivors are finally sharing what they've experienced with the world. Children in these facilities have been even finding ways to reach out to Breaking Code Silence for help, despite being dismissed, discouraged, and threatened into